Hi, I'm Lydia.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're from Body Matters Australasia. And today we're going to be talking about a common experience that many eating disorders sufferers share, and that's the eating disorder's voice.
A lot of people have trouble understanding what this eating disorder voice might be like if they've never actually experienced an eating disorder personally. And so we thought it would be helpful to take some time to explain what the experience is like for sufferers.
This eating disorder's voice that eating disorder sufferers describe hearing is not actually an auditory hallucination like what you'd see in someone who has schizophrenia or some form of psychosis. It's more like an inner voice that has gone faulty. So you know how when you're growing up, all of us have an inner voice, and often it can take on a role that protects us. You know, if you're thinking of walking down a dark alley at night, your inner voice might actually kick in and say, that's a really bad idea, and you listen to that and it protects you. But with eating disorder sufferers, it's almost like that inner voice that they've grown to learn and trust has actually started to go faulty. And often they will describe hearing that voice in the third person. So it will say horrible things to them, saying things like, you're worthless, you're disgusting, you're a vile piece of filth. I mean, it's different for everyone, but it can be quite horrible. And the hardest thing a lot of the time is getting that voice to shut off and let them alone.
People often say, why don't you make that voice be quiet? Why don't you learn how to quieten that voice? And the tricky thing for people who have eating disorders is that the voice is absolute. It's a voice that's almost impossible to reckon with, and it's a voice that's almost impossible to separate from.
And it often takes on a moral tone. It's almost as though it is speaking to the sufferer from a position of speaking universal truths. And so it's very hard for the sufferer to challenge that voice. In fact, oftentimes because it positions the sufferer as someone who's worthless and bad and who deserves to be punished, they can start to feel as though listening to that voice is actually the morally right thing to do. And it's very hard for people to understand that. How can starving yourself or abusing your body be seen as a morally good thing?
And further to that, as the voice continues, there's no other alternative discourse that the person can actually hear. So that inner voice is internalized to the point that it's beyond negotiation.
And oftentimes people will hear it scream at them. Sometimes it can actually get louder or more frequent as their illness worsens. So it could be even in the middle of going shopping, they're hearing these things about themselves. If you can imagine hearing an inner voice, an inner dialogue that's saying to you, you're worthless, you're disgusting, over and over, several times a day, incessantly, it almost takes on a brainwashing effect, and it absolutely crushes their self-esteem and sense of self-worth and their identity. One key strategy that many sufferers actually find really helpful is to actually name that voice for what it is. When you recognize that there's a hostile internal voice that's saying things like you're disgusting, you're a pig, you're fat, and all of that sort of thing, it's really helpful to actually give it a name. So some sufferers will call it Anna, short for anorexia, Mia, short for bulimia, Ed, short for eating disorder. I've known patients to give it the name Con for con artist. Different names just to create that bit of distance so that you can actually recognize the difference between your own thoughts and actually the eating disordered thoughts.
Another strategy that people have found very helpful before is to try to, again, continue distancing yourself from the eating disorder voice. Lydia spoke before about the eating disorder voice, sort of when someone's really sick, talking in terms of the third person. So you should do this, or you are hopeless, you are terrible. So another thing that we'd recommend is just trying to shift that when you're hearing that voice saying you to I feel. So I feel disgusting right now, I feel hopeless right now. And again, that's a lot more empowering, and it positions you in a place where you can work through some of those those thoughts in a much more helpful way and a much more empowered way than when it's speaking to you in the third person. But more than anything, what we'd be recommending to anyone who's experiencing this eating disorder voice that we've described is professional intervention. So coming to speak to an eating disorder specialist, someone that you feel comfortable with, and working through some of those beliefs that the eating disorder might perpetuate through this eating disorder voice.
So those are a few strategies to try and challenge that eating disorder voice. And if you're someone who has actually experienced that eating disorder voice or knows of someone who has struggled with it, we'd love to hear of any strategies that have been helpful for you or your friends or your loved ones. So we'd love for you to share that with us.
And you've been watching Sarah and Lydia at Body Matters Australasia,
where every body matters.